yeah, given that this is the first video in this series, I thought it may be important to give a little bit of an introduction, what we're trying to accomplish here, and why I'm doing it. My intent is to create a 3 to 5 minute video that encompasses each chapter of the book of Deuteronomy. What we want to be able to do is show some history, show the geography, where they are in different places, but most importantly what I want to be able to do is I want to talk about what is God trying to say to us in this chapter. And so that's what we'll really kind of focus on. I want to keep it short, purposely short, just for a couple of reasons. One, this is YouTube, and attention spans don't tend to be that long. I know mine aren't. So I want to try to keep them short and try to keep them interesting. And finally, I will tell you that God has placed us on our heart to do this. And as we see, when we get into chapter 1 of Deuteronomy, we'll see that it's not a good idea to ignore the will of God. So that's why I'm doing it. Anyway, let's get started. The book of Deuteronomy is actually the 5th book of the Hebrew Bible. It is the 5th book of the Christian Bible as well. It is part of what's called the Torah meaning the first 5 books, meaning the word Torah means instruction or teaching. Those 5 books are the instruction for the Hebrews to go forward into their lives. It's also the 5th book of what we call the Pentateuch. And the Pentateuch is a Greek name that comes meaning 5 scrolls, and it basically is pointing to the same thing as the Torah. So you'll hear it as being the 5th book of the Torah, you'll hear it being the 5th book of the Law, you'll hear it being the 5th book of the Pentateuch. It can be any of those things. The book is based basically 3 sections, and they are fairly well defined. You'll see some overlap and you'll see some things kind of go back and forth, but in actuality, the book is fairly well defined into 3 sections. The first 4 chapters, chapters 1 through 4, are based on the history, and they are going to help Moses set the stage for the Israelites, telling them where you've come from, and that's going to be very important for what the rest of the book is about. The second and largest section is chapters 5 through 30, and those really are the law. They are going to be a lot of rules and a lot of regulations, things that you can and can't do, people you can and can't talk to, things like that. So we'll see a lot of that going on in chapters 5 through 30. And finally, at the close of the book, chapters 31 through 34, we're going to see Moses saying goodbye, and we're going to see him blessing the people, and we're going to see the installation of Joshua as the next leader of the Israelites. So the setting of the book is right at the end of the 40 years of wandering in the desert. We'll get into why they were wandering here in the first chapter, but they're right at the end of that, and they're just about to enter into the promised land. They're going to cross the Jordan River and start their lives. So that's kind of where they are. I'll go to a map here and show you this is where I think that they are. And I think that I'm not alone in this, but we'll see in some later chapters why I believe this. But basically what we have is, if I draw it real quick here, we have the coastline of Israel, we have the Sea of Galilee here, Jordan River coming down, and then we have the Dead Sea below that. The people are sitting right about this area. They're in a land called the Moabites, so they're in Moab. The name Deuteronomy actually comes from the Septuagint, which is a Greek version of the Old Testament. And if you don't know why there's a Greek version of the Old Testament, go back and look at your history. Go back and look at who occupied the land around 300 BC. Alexander the Great came in. He set up a pretty long reign in Israel. So there was a lot of Greeks in the area, and they translated the Old Testament into Greek as a result of that. Anyway, the name Deuteronomy actually comes from the Septuagint, the Greek version, and it comes from Deuteronomy 17:18, where it says, "And when he sits on the throne of his kingdom, he shall write for himself in a book a copy of this law, approved by the Levitical priest." Well, The word Deuteronomy comes from sort of a mistranslation of this, a copy of the law, as a second law. And that's what the word Deuteronomy means, a second law. It's not a second law, it's not a different law, it is a copy. And what the kings were instructed to do is they were to take the law as it was given to them, and they were to write it down in a book for themselves, and then they were going to study it every day so that they knew what they were doing. That's what the book of Deuteronomy instructs people to do in chapter 17. Finally, the Hebrew name for this book is actually Devarim, and I probably said that incorrectly, but I'm going to say all the names and all the words with confidence, so we're going to assume that I'm saying them right when I'm probably not. But Devarim, this is a Hebrew word that means these are the words. And if you look at the opening sentence of Deuteronomy, it reads, "These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan in the wilderness." These are the words, and that's the Hebrew name for this book. All right, landing the plane. At the end of each of the videos, I'm going to do a small thing that I'm going to call landing the plane. I got that actually from a phrase that our pastor at our church uses. He would say his children would sit out in the congregation and say, "Dad, you need to land the plane. You need to end your sermon." I think it's kind of a neat phrase. So we're going to land the plane, and we're going to bring home the points of what Deuteronomy is about. So while I said that Deuteronomy has a lot of history in it, the first 4 chapters are history, and then there's actually references to history throughout the rest of the book. And it's also a book with a lot of rules. I mentioned the big section of the book, verses chapters 5 through 30, are all about how to live your lives and don't do this and do that sort of things. What the book of Deuteronomy is primarily about, and what we're really supposed to be seeing here, is it is the relationship between God and his people. And you'll see me do this sort of a movement. It's this vertical relationship between God and the people. What God wants to do is he wants to expose the relationship he has with them, and he wants to lay out how he wants their relationship with him to be. He dearly wants a relationship with his people, and he wants them to be close to him. And that's what we're really going to see in the book of Deuteronomy. If you look past all the rules and regulations, that's what's happening here, is God wants to be his people, to love him and to worship him. Secondarily, and almost as important, but clearly not as important, it is about a horizontal relationship. It's about the people's interaction with each other, how they are to deal with each other, what sorts of things they are supposed to do and not do, whether it be judicial systems or forgiveness of debt, all those sorts of things. How are you supposed to relate to your neighbor? And it's going to be a great study for that, so hang in there. We're going to go chapter 1 next. Thanks a lot. Thanks for taking the time to watch. As always, I pray that you got something out of this and that God has spoken to you during these few minutes of time that we spent together. If you like what you saw, give us the old thumbs up. More importantly, I would encourage you to click the subscribe here box, subscribe to the channel, and tell someone who needs to hear it about the channel. This is out there for people to use. Thanks a lot.